I am joined with Arnaud Deverlay, a good friend of the show, my man. Thank you for joining me. And it's short notice. I really appreciate you joining me. How you doing today? You doing okay?
Hello, Jamal. I'm doing fine, thank you.
And just for the audience, Arnaud Deverlay, he's an author, political analyst, and international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His latest book, Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of the American Political Consensus. I brought you on because I am super interested in a few things. One has to do with the proposal that Trump put out and the reinstatement, or let's say the 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 what's the word I'm looking for? Restatement. I'll go with that of Putin's, or let's say Moscow's political position that I'm calling a surrender document. Well, I mean, and the reason why I call it a surrender document is because, for all intents and purposes, that's what it is. The loser doesn't get to dictate terms. And what Moscow is outlining are the terms of Washington's and Ukraine's surrender. I'll reiterate. And keep in mind, he's putting this out there at the BRICS summit. And this is after Donald Trump puts out his final peace plan that he is potentially going to walk if he doesn't get what he wants in his peace plan, that neither side, by the way, Zelensky, the European Union, or Russia would ever accept, because the plan from the Russian side is just ludicrous. Ukraine must repeal its legal ban on negotiations with Russia. There's that. Ukraine must not join NATO and must maintain a neutral, non-aligned status. Ukraine must address the consequences of the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev, including reversing laws and actions aimed at it. I'll just show it to the audience. I mean, I'm just reading it as opposed to just showing it. Let me do this. And yes, they're still doing construction. I can't do anything about it. I'm sorry. Ukraine must address the consequences of the neo-Nazi regime. This is the denazification. Ukraine must accept the international recognition of Russia's sovereignty over Crimea, Sevastopol, Donetsk, Lugansk People's Republics, Kherson, and Zaporozhye regions. Oh, that's going to be hard. That's going to require a surrender, an unconditional surrender, which is interesting. And I want to get your take on that. Lavrov emphasized that any commitments made by Kiev must be legally binding, enforceable, and permanent. Again, that's going to be hard. That's interesting that he's putting that in. He also stated that Russia's broader demands include demilitarization, denazification of Ukraine, lifting of Western sanctions. You're not going to get that. Withdrawal of legal claims and arrest warrants against Russian officials, and the return of Russian assets frozen abroad. Now, I want to get your take on a few of these, because I'm super interested in how they plan to get two of these. And that goes to this larger point of how do you end the war? So right here, Ukraine must address the consequences of the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev, reversing the actions aimed at elimination of Russian language, media, culture, traditions, canonical orthodoxy. Ukraine must accept the international recognition of Russia's sovereignty over Crimea, Sevastopol, Donetsk, Lugansk People's Republic, Kherson, Zaporozhye. How do you do that? How do you do that?
Well, let's just stop at the second point, I think, of the conditions, the one bearing on Kiev having to own up essentially to its own deeds, but also what it is. It's very interesting, and in a way, and as you mentioned, the only way this could happen is unconditional surrender, not unlike what we've seen in 1945 in Germany, with an international tribunal putting on trial not only the Kiev regime, but also the ideology and by extension, those who propped it up from outside, and those who to this day in Western Europe, at least still in Western Europe, maybe less so in the United States now, are somewhat facilitating it through the Russophobia. And so this would require somehow putting on trial. Remember that those trials, to the extent they are instrumentalized and put forward by victors of military conflict, they aim to set the narrative for the next few decades at the very least. This is what the trials in Nuremberg were all about. Never again. No one really looked into the egregious humanitarian violations derived from the fire bombing of Dresden, for instance. Dresden was not on the menu. No one talked about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. No one talked about the forced transfer of German population after the conflict. So it's only focused on certain things, but not others. And in that respect, it's interesting because this always gets me to think about the introduction statement, the opening statement of the Nuremberg chief prosecutor, Robert Jackson, who basically, to make a long story short, said that you should be careful about this victor's justice slippery slope thing, so that down the road, in the SPA's history as a way of playing, cynically and ironically with coincidences and changes of alliance, you don't find yourself in the very position that the German High Command is finding itself into, and you get to be judged by their descendants. In other words, that's what he meant. So if you politicize, somehow the what you might call it, the narrative, using international law by only judging certain acts but not others, you open a whole can of worms so that down the road you might find yourself in the dock. And this is exactly where we're heading to here. I mean, we have all the elements. We have an international conflict, albeit through proxy, but it is an international conflict for all intended purposes. It's the whole of NATO, 50 plus countries, more or less, arrayed against the Russian Federation and its allies, since we found out a couple of days ago that North Korea was assisting the Russian Federation in the Kursk Oblast operation. So you would say basically that Russia and North Korea were fighting the 21st century version of fascism, since the Banderites, never made any secrets of their nostalgic, nor their longing for the ideology which prevailed in uh, West Germany, in Germany 80 years ago. And it's interesting because this happens as we speak, a few days away from the 80th anniversary of what they call here Victory Day, May 9th, where about 20 countries will be represented, mostly from the global south and Eurasia. None of the part of the world that used to be allied to the then Soviet Union in defeating Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan. But it's interesting in that sense that this communique gets published around that time of the year, I guess, after all those kind of no nonsensical back and forth. Steve Witkoff, whatever, talks about ceasefire, this idea coming, somehow percolating from Washington, that the guy in charge, well, the one we assume is in charge, has no clue what's going on and doesn't understand, the more subtle point of the conflict. And he's just basically slamming his fist on the table because he's not getting what he wants fast enough. And it doesn't work like this,
Yeah.
So Lavrov, in that sense, was, well inspired to somehow, uh, recenter the debate, and reiterate what has been known for months, if not for at least 3 years now, in as far as Russians' conditions.
Yeah.
We're not going to do a ceasefire for the sake of a ceasefire. We want to get somehow an understanding, a framework, in principle, a memorandum of understanding as to what the fundamental causes of this conflict are about, and exterior signs from negotiating partner with maybe a trust building measures to boot, that we are serious about initiating such a process. Otherwise, uh, there's no point whatsoever. I mean, it's a waste of time, and Moscow is not going to be allowing itself to be hoodwinked in a Minsk III agreement. And to the extent Trump, wants to walk away, as he said several times, well, let him walk away. I mean, but that's a fundamental point here is that, if we are to call into account what is set an historical and legal record of what happened in Kiev, not only the last 11 years, but if we are really, perfectible about it, probably going back to the late 1950s, since the Banderite were somewhat um, assisted by the CIA as far as back as the late 1950s. We know that
Right.
now. They were keeping them under the ready to be exploited again at the right moment. So anyway, but this, as you can see, is, some would say, it's a maximalist demand. But again, as you said, I mean, who won the conflict? If at the current moment the conflict is won by the Russian Federation and its allies.
Yeah.
And so they are going to be demanding accountability, and they're going to be demanding uh, an inspection, a self introspection, so to speak, from those countries who somehow, despite everything that had been set in stone, so we thought, back in 45, 46, during the Nuremberg trial, allowed the beast to be unleashed again. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, we have 27 million people who lost their lives in the Soviet Union, and so Russia is a successor state. So it's something here is a sacred, central pillar of how Russia defines itself, not only vis-a-vis itself, but vis-a-vis the world. Is
Hmm.
we bled so that the world could be free.
Right.
And there we are again. So it's not going to be just about signing a few mineral deals and moving on. There has to be a reckoning. And so I think this particular point, in and of itself, tells me this is not going to be accepted in the West, because right now we're dealing with a generation of leaders who, well, let's be honest. I mean, for many of them, they actually are grandchildren of Nazis
Nazis. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
begin with.
And some of them
So
look
they're
like
not going
Nazis, if we're
to,
being bluntly honest.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't possibly imagine, unless those people, not just the Kiev regime, but those people are, somehow called into account for their propping up of this regime. Uh, you know, you're not gonna expect that this is going to be carried out.
Accepted.
There's
Yeah.
no way.
I mean, Trump's thing, it got, and by the way, I love the way you put that. But it is hard for us to reconcile. Like, it's hard for us to kind of get that. Like, my ex, I know I bring her up a lot, in Europe. She lives in Austria. And when you guys talk about history, you guys are talking about like wars, like these world wars and family members that were in these wars and the entanglements that were in these wars. That is not really the way we think about it in America. I mean, yeah, some of us went over to fight, but it's different. If you have family who's, in that war, who's fighting, who lives on that continent, it's very different. And I would imagine it's very different if you're a Russian and you're like, they're unleashing Nazis in real terms. Like people who, to see tanks riding with Nazi insignias on it, running through Kursk, is a shocking thing.
It's it's
Um,
it's it's insane.
yeah, but nothing is sacred to them in this way. They have political objectives that they want to accomplish, and they are willing to use whoever, um, whatever is willing to carry a gun in order to accomplish those political objectives. Even something that was ideally destroyed back in the 40s. And so, yeah, I can imagine if you're a Russian, this thing that's sacred is being desecrated in real terms in a way that they don't quite get or they don't quite see. And certainly somebody who like Donald Trump, who only thinks of himself, is never going to understand. I mean, like think of the plan that he put forth. Like one of the items, and I'm going to go back to Lavrov for a moment, but just to show how absurd this plan is. And this plan, you could almost think of it, is it a plan to fail, right? Ukraine regains control of Zaporozhye nuclear power plant through U.S. control and administration of the plant, with electricity distributed to both sides, and also Kavka Dam. So territory that is under the Russian Constitution that was fought for and won in blood is supposed to be given back to Ukraine, and that the U.S. is going to administer in Russia. Are you serious? Like you see that and you think to yourself, okay, this is absurd. This is never
Whereas
going to be.
there's the price of blood, you're right, but there's also the fact that if you hand over the NPP in Zaporozhye, they're going to be using it to power factories which are going to be resuming making weapons. That's why they need it. So
Yes.
that goes against the one of the twin pillars of demilitarization and denazification, which were the two rationale put forward, when the special military operation started. So you're right. I mean, it just makes no sense. I mean, why would you provide, the other side with the means to resume,
War making.
manufacturing the very means? Yes, it just makes no sense.
This one from
But you're right.
Lavrov.
It looks like it's actually designed to fail
Do you think it
in a
is?
way.
Like, do you think that
Well, I mean,
Trump wants to walk? He wants to pivot to Pacific. He has like ADD, so he doesn't have the attention span to actually think this up through. I mean, I can't tell if he's that incompetent or if it's designed to fail. He wants to call it today.
well, this actually brings us to asking whether or not Trump is a genuine political figure or just a construct, as we are fond of seeing in the US now, going back to after JFK. Everybody after JFK, to some extent or another, is a construct of the Uni Party. So
Yeah.
the Uni Party has its own rationale, its own agenda, and every 4 years, depending on the political climate, it switches in order to gather consent from the masses using media campaign and marketing and what have you, creating people out of thin air. I hope we'll get maybe the chance to talk about
We
this
will.
later
Yeah,
on.
we will.
But this actually fits, as you said, and then before I got on, I was hearing what you were saying, and basically you alluded to it yourself that Trump was selected, not as much elected, but first selected because there was a need for a grumpy old man, but with some kind of conscience in the sense that he can speak without mumbling his words or looking lost after a speech. At least they have that with Trump. We get the feeling again that we have someone who somehow functions. But yeah, you're right. The guy he was selected. He's selected, and so in that sense, that pivot to China, which used to be Obama's trope back in 08 or 09 when he took office, there was to be a reset. Remember Hillary Clinton and Lavrov? They had that huge reset button sequence, media sequence.
Yep.
And so the idea was, so basically, we are heading toward a kind of reiteration of this sequence. Is that for now, for whatever reason, we're not going to make it too public because it would require the public to investigate why is it that we can't get what we want vis-a-vis putting Russia, spreading Russia to the four winds, because we require them to realize that we're not as strong as we claim to be to begin with, or we're not the superpower or hyperpower like Hubert Védrine, a former French foreign minister, used to say back in 96.
Mm-hmm.
The emperor has, if not no clothes, at least his cape is shredded. So, but yeah, that's the idea right now. And so this whole kind of dancing around, that we've seen the last few weeks, it's all about that. It's trying to kind of put the kettle pot, on the back burner until we get a chance down the road to resume, to the extent circumstances have changed either in the West or in Russia, so that we can resume that.
Right.
Because again, I mean, you go after China, fine. You do the pivot to the Pacific. You go after China. Whatever happens, happens. To the extent your goals are accomplished in the Pacific, what do you do then? You recenter your focus on Russia, because this is what the American deep state uniparty is all about. It's all about seeking new markets, going back to Theodore Roosevelt, and going back even before that to the Manifest Destiny. There was a few delay with the Civil War because you had to bring the South into line as far as the industrial model was concerned. No need for agrarian, and so you had to waste, so to speak, 4 years to resolve this internal dispute until the time came to resume the westward expansion, and at the expense of all the 200 million natives who live there, and with all the blood and all the injustices, the historical injustices, that we know that characterized the rise of the United States, so to speak, right? All this on the back of the workers, the Gilded Age, the robber barons. Again, with the we have the progressive era, and then we have the 1930s. We need to somehow, because the Soviet Union is now growing to be an ideological rival. We need to put water in our wine, and we need to somehow, look as if we care about the workers. So we get FDR in. He's got those fire chats. We get the big work project. Keynesian economics. The state gets bigger. We create somewhat of not a welfare state. I won't go to that point, but we create some kind of helping you to land devices, if the fall is too, and it goes like this pretty much, all throughout the 1960s, 70s, more or less, 80s. Then the Soviet Union collapses, and then there's no need to keep those artifact, this makeup. You can take it off. You can take off the mask. So now we start exporting our industrial base to emerging markets. Because we like slave labor. It increases profit margins, and this goes on for 30 years. The Chinese, not only they're thrifty, they save their money, they use the dividends to educate their youth, to create a middle class out of thin air, to take 700 million out of sheer poverty. They develop their countries, the infrastructure, their education. They start, developing patents. By 2017, they were already leading the pack in terms of patent filings. And now, for the last few years, that same uniparty is like, oh, you guys you were supposed to be, those kind of yellow people who were not capable of doing anything on their own. So we can only conceive of your success as you stole intellectual property. You didn't play along by our rules, and it's unfair. And you're working too hard, and you're manufacturing too much, and you're working too well, and only at a fraction of the price that we would like to charge for the same product. So of course, but see, basically it's all about adjustments. So the Russian thing through the Ukraine, they tried it failed. Meanwhile, and in parallel, the Chinese are growing increasingly. It's exponential every year. It's double, quadruple, octuple, and so on, times 16, times 32. It starts very slowly, after their entry into the the
WTO.
world WTO, sorry, yeah. And starting in '08, when they organized the Olympics there, it's kind of like a coming out party. They're starting showing the world what they've been doing the last 7 years. And after that, it's just exponential. And now we get to a point where the the uniparty in the US know that they have a limited window to prevent China to be in such a place that you won't be able to, you won't even get a chance, because they still think they have a chance right now to put the brakes on this expansion. There's been it's called a trap, the Thucydides. I don't know if they call it a trap. When you have an ascending not
Oh,
imperial, an ascending
Thucydides
power and a
trap.
descending.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Thucydides trap. Yeah.
So this is where we are right now. Usually, it happens somewhat smoothly historically. We saw it with the British Empire to the American Empire. It
Serbian,
was,
Austria.
yes, exactly. And so it's somewhat of a quasi-natural process, except that we're dealing with a country which maybe feels that, owing to its own national ethos, which is predicated on manifest destiny, this messianic complex. Technically, if you think about it, it's after the Messiah comes, there's nothing left, right? It's the Messiah. So they cannot conceive deep down in their psyche that they've got to hand over the baton and just become one of the boys. Welcome to the club. Welcome to normality. You wanted to be accepted. You can be accepted because now you've gone through the rapid ascension in the peaking, and now you have to somehow accept reality. Besides, it's all self-inflicted, right? I mean, it wasn't written in stone that you would be somehow depreciating so fast, but you allowed some of your elites to be so greedy. I mean, I'm not the one saying it. It's Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, one of the last
It's
30
true.
years most, popular piece of popular culture is vintage, right? Greed
Yeah,
is good.
it's
Greed is
true.
good.
I mean,
But
like
in
with
the
China,
end,
real quick, you make the point about China, and look at what they did. They took their money and they used it to build their society. We just
thank you.
made people rich, and then we turn around and blame China.
To enrich a few,
Yeah,
in Wall Street. And those people don't manufacture nothing. I mean, they redefine even the meaning of mathematics and physical laws of nature with the credit default swap and the what you call, the no interest, negative interest borrowing. So you borrow money, but they give you money to borrow money. So it's insane. All those. This is kind of like it's alchemy. It makes no sense. And you can. I think it's Lincoln who used to say you can fool people, everybody sometimes. You can fool a few people all the time, but you cannot fool everybody all the time. And this is where we are now. This is coming to a head. Everybody is up to the gig. Everybody is up to the to what's been going on, and there's nowhere to